Why has Africa not developed forever? Have you ever wondered such a question? You must have seen pictures of poor children in Africa at least once through TV, YouTube, and other media. Poverty has existed in Africa for decades and does not seem to be developing. Some may feel that way. However, is it really true that Africa will not develop forever? In other words, does such data exist? And if Africa is not really developing, what exactly is the reason? In part 1 and part 2, I'm going to talk about the truth about Africa. Hello everyone, my name is Kanta. On my channel, where I have uploaded many videos about Africa, I frequently receive comments such as, why doesn't Africa continue to develop even though it has been supported for decades? As I will cover in more detail in a later video, it is estimated that Africa receives $53 billion in international aid each year and $1.2 trillion over the past 30 years alone. However, if you ask why Africa is not developing, you should also consider the following 2 questions. The first question is, what does it mean to develop in the first place? When using abstract language, try to be specific about what it means. The term develop is too abstract, so how much Africa is developing depends on how you define the term of development. The second question is it really based on data that Africa is not developing? Don't you assume that Africa is not developing based on some image or fragmented knowledge? It is widely believed among some that Africa will not develop forever. In reality, however, African countries have made a lot of progress in the past few decades. Let's begin by looking at the degree of development in Africa from 5 different perspectives. Incidentally, the words Sub-Saharan Africa appear many times after this. The Sahara Desert is the world's largest desert in the northern part of the African continent. Sub-Saharan Africa is where poverty and hunger are the biggest problems in the world today. I hope that from this point forward, you will basically think of Sub-Saharan Africa. Africa has experienced economic growth over the past 2 decades at a level higher than the global average growth rate. In Sub-Saharan Africa, economic growth is expected to reach 3.9% in 2023, with further expansion anticipated beyond 2024. Some African countries have also had some of the fastest economic growth in the world. For example, Ethiopia achieved economic growth of 10.0% in 2018 and 9.0% in 2019. Other African countries such as Kenya and Nigeria are also experiencing sustained economic growth and are attracting the world's attention as new investment destinations. This economic growth indicates that a variety of industries are developing in Africa and new business opportunities are emerging. The second perspective is to improve the level of education. It is often said that African children cannot attend school, but is that really true? According to data from the World Bank, the primary enrollment rate, or the percentage of children who can attend elementary school in the African region south of the Sahara Desert, has risen from 73% in 1990 to 99% in 2019. However, in reality, there are many children who quit school due to economic circumstances, so this alone does not tell the whole story. But in any case, it is true that the school attendance rate has greatly improved. Just one more piece of data on the improvement in education levels. The percentage of 15 to 24-year-olds living in Africa who can read, the so-called literacy rate, has risen from 65% in 1990 to 77% in 2019. These data show that the level of education in Africa is steadily improving. Let's look at some other data. The third perspective is the reduction of poverty and hunger. In many African countries, especially since 2000, poverty rates have dropped significantly and people's living standards have improved. For example, the level of poverty at which people cannot afford basic needs of life, including food, shelter, safe drinking water, education, and healthcare, is called absolute poverty. The percentage of people in absolute poverty also decreased from 56.5% in 2000 to 34.9% in 2019. The percentage of children under 5 years of age who are underweight or underweight compared to healthy is also improving, from 24.8% in 2000 to 16.9% in 2020. The fourth perspective is the change in infant mortality. The infant mortality rate is simply explained as the percentage of children who die from illness or other causes before their 5th birthday. This graph shows the change in the number of children who die before their 5th birthday in African countries south of the Sahara Desert. It gives an idea of how many children out of every 1,000 die before they reach the age of 5. This graph shows that in 1990, 179 out of every 1,000 children in Africa south of the Sahara were dying before the age of 5. By 2021, that number had dropped to 73. Just looking at the last 30 years, the number of children dying before their 5th birthday has dropped by less than half. A lower infant mortality rate means, for example, that more people have access to hospitals and that water and sewage systems are being developed. It also indicates that sanitation has developed. This is truly a sign that Africa is developing. The fifth perspective is innovation. In Africa, technological innovations have been progressing in recent years, and developments are underway in a number of areas. A particularly noteworthy concept is the phenomenon known as leapfrogging. Leapfrogging refers to the phenomenon in which an emerging country, or in other words, a developing country, catches up with a new technology after the developed countries, skipping all the intermediate steps and reaching the cutting edge of technology at once, instead of going through the usual gradual evolution. Thus, leapfrogging is a phenomenon in which technological innovation does not occur one step at a time, like climbing a flight of stairs, but instead jumps over the intervening steps as if leaping frogs, and suddenly reaches the cutting edge of technology. A simple example is a person who never had a phone at home suddenly gets a smartphone, which is a leapfrog. For example, in many parts of Africa, mobile payment services using smartphones and cell phones are available for those who do not have bank accounts. This allows people in Africa to make various payments without credit cards or bank accounts, as long as they have a smartphone or cell phone. These systems provide safe and fast financial services to people who would otherwise not have access to traditional financial services. From these examples, we can see that Africa is developing all at once by leapfrogging the traditional stages of technological progress and suddenly adopting the latest technologies. We have looked at Africa's development from 5 different perspectives, and if we look at specific data like this, we can see that it is actually only our assumption that Africa will not develop forever. But I would like to end on a positive message, saying that Africa is developing properly. But looking at the situation in Africa over the past few years, I cannot be all that optimistic. In other words, poverty and hunger in Africa, which had been improving, have become severe again. As we have seen, there are many data and facts that show that the African continent as a whole has developed slowly but surely. On the other hand, there are 54 countries on the African continent, and poverty and hunger are still severe in some countries. African economies were hit particularly hard in 2020 when the COVID-19 began, and even harder in 2022 when the Ukrainian crisis began. In 2020 alone, for example, the chaos caused by the COVID-19 pandemic has plunged more than 40 million people in Africa into poverty. This has erased all the poverty reduction achieved in at least the last 5 years. In 2019, before the spread of the COVID-19, Africa's economic growth rate stood at 3.3%. However, in 2020, it plummeted to -2.1%. The economic devastation caused by the COVID-19 epidemic also led to starvation and malnutrition for many people in Africa. In 2019, 8.4% of the total population was undernourished, rising to 9.9% in 2020 after it began to become an epidemic. A further blow to Africa was the Ukraine crisis that began in 2022. Russia and Ukraine are both major grain exporters in the world. The entry of Russia and Ukraine into a state of war and the global rise in food prices have exacerbated the food problem in Africa. This made food inaccessible to many people in Africa, exacerbating the hunger problem. And even now, in 2024, there are still many countries in Africa where war is still raging. Africa develops, then the situation becomes unstable again, and the country reverts back to poverty. Such is the harsh reality of the situation surrounding Africa over the past few years. Why will poverty and hunger never go away from Africa? Why is it that despite decades of assistance, they can never become self-reliant? As lightly mentioned at the beginning of this video, Africa receives as much as $53 billion in international aid annually, and according to one study, it has received $1.2 trillion in international aid over the past 30 years alone. Why is it that Africa still suffers from various problems? In other words, what are the reasons why Africa cannot develop? I will explain this question in the video in part 2. If you have not yet subscribed to my channel, I would appreciate it if you subscribe to my channel. My channel provides easy to understand explanations of world issues that are difficult to learn about through other channels. If you found this video informative, please support me by clicking the like button. Thank you for watching the video to the end. See you again in the next video.